Welcome to StoriesX. Under the flickering streetlights of quiet Virginia night, Marcus Porter, a man with secrets buried deep, is pulled over by two white female cops, Brenda Carter and Michelle Sullivan. Their flashlights cut through the dark, their smirks hiding something sinister. "You failed to stop," they claim, but Marcus knows he didn't. Then, a bag of white powder appears in his trunk, planted, obvious, and wrong. Who is Marcus really? And what don't these cops know about the man they're framing? One thing's clear. This stop isn't random, and the truth is about to explode in ways no one expects. Want to find out how it all unravels? Stick around to the full story. And if you're hooked, smash that like button. Let's get StoriesX to 39 likes, and keep these gripping tales coming. The night in Arlington, Virginia, hung heavy and still, like a thick wool blanket draped over town. The suburban streets lay deserted, save for the faint rustle of dry leaves skittering across the sidewalks and the flickering glow of old streetlights casting pools of amber light. Marcus Porter sat behind the wheel of his sleek black SUV, his strong hands resting lightly on the steering wheel, his sharp eyes scanning every corner of the quiet streets. He wore a dark leather jacket, the collar flipped up to frame his angular face, his deep brown skin catching the dim glow from the dashboard. The watch on his wrist ticked just past midnight. A long day was finally winding down. Marcus wasn't a man who craved attention. As a covert CIA operative, he'd spent months in this sleepy little town, gathering intel on a web of corruption he suspected ran deep into local law enforcement. His work here was nearly done, the pieces in place for a clean exit. A faint smile tugged at his lips, a flicker of relief warming his chest. But as he slowed at a quiet intersection, his eyes caught the dull glint of a reflective stop sign. He came to a full stop, second nature for a man trained to notice every detail, a skill honed over years of living in the shadows. Seconds later, red and blue lights erupted in his rear-view mirror. The shrill wail of a siren shattered the night stillness, but Marcus didn't flinch. His breathing stayed steady, his hands firm on the wheel, his mind already shifting into gear. This wasn't his first run-in with cops, but something in the air tonight felt off, a razor-sharp instinct he'd learned to trust. He eased the SUV to the curb, killed the engine, and reached for the glove compartment to grab his license and registration. Through the mirror, he watched a patrol car pull up behind him, its headlights stretching long shadows across the damp asphalt. Two figures stepped out of the cruiser, their movements deliberate and measured. The first was Brenda Carter, a tall, wiry white woman with blonde hair pulled tight into a bun, her piercing eyes glinting under the brim of her police cap. Behind her came Michelle Sullivan, shorter and stockier, her lips pressed into a thin line that hinted at a smirk she was holding back. Both wore navy blue Arlington PD uniforms, their badges gleaming under the streetlights. Marcus clocked their names instantly, a habit etched into him by years in the field. "Good evening," Carter said, her voice carrying a practiced authority. She leaned down, her flashlight beam sweeping across Marcus's face and into the SUV's interior. "You know why I pulled you over tonight." Marcus kept his expression neutral, his deep brown eyes meeting hers without a flicker of hesitation. "No, ma'am," he replied, his tone low and even. "I wasn't speeding, and I stopped at the intersection." Carter's lips twitched, a faint, condescending smile curling at the edges. "Actually, you failed to stop at that sign back there. That's a moving violation." Marcus's brow creased slightly, but he kept his cool. "I'm certain I stopped," he said, his voice steady and firm. Carter cut him off, her tone sharpening. "License and registration." Marcus handed over the documents without a fight, his movements slow and deliberate. He wasn't in the mood to escalate. Not yet. Carter took the papers, her eyes lingering on his ID, as if searching for something to latch onto. "Virginia plates, local address," she muttered, then louder. "You live around here?" Marcus nodded. "Yes, ma'am." Suddenly, Sullivan, who'd been lingering near the back of the SUV, called out, "Hey, Carter, come check this out." Her voice was low, laced with something conspiratorial. Carter handed Marcus his papers back, barking a curt, "Stay in the car," before heading to join her partner. Through the side mirror, Marcus caught them whispering, Sullivan pointing at the trunk, their eyes exchanging a look he knew all too well, the look of predators setting a trap. Carter returned, her face now a mask of grim determination. "Step out of the vehicle," she ordered. Marcus tilted his head, his voice calm but probing. "May I ask why?" "We have reason to believe you're in possession of illegal substances," Carter snapped, her words clipped and rehearsed. Marcus narrowed his eyes. "Illegal substances?" he echoed, his tone dropping lower. "I think you got the wrong guy." Carter smirked. "We'll see about that." Sullivan was already at the rear, handcuffs in hand, a smug grin spreading across her face. Marcus knew what was coming, but he stepped out of the SUV anyway, his movements slow and purposeful. This wasn't the end. It was just the opening move in a game he'd played 100 times before. The air outside the SUV was cool and damp, carrying the faint scent of wet leaves and exhaust. Marcus stood on the cracked asphalt, his broad shoulders squared, hands relaxed at his sides. The red and blue lights in the patrol car pulsed rhythmically, painting fleeting shadows across his leather jacket. Brenda Carter circled back to the front of the vehicle, her boots clicking against the pavement, while Michelle Sullivan popped the trunk with a theatrical flourish. The shorter woman's smirk widened as she reached in and pulled out a small, unmarked plastic bag, holding up like a trophy. Inside, a white powder glinted under the streetlights, crude, obvious, and entirely out of place. "There it is," Sullivan said, her voice dripping with mock surprise. "What do you know? A little bag of powdery goodness." She dangled it between her fingers, letting it catch the light. Marcus's eyes flicked to the bag, then back to the officers. His face remained a stone wall, unreadable, but inside, his mind was a storm of calculation. That bag wasn't his. He'd checked the SUV top to bottom before leaving his safe house, an old habit from years of fieldwork. This was a plant, and a sloppy one at that. Carter stepped closer, her smirk mirroring her partner's. "Anything you want to tell us?" she asked, her tone taunting, as if she expected him to crack. Marcus let a faint smile curl his lips, not out of fear, but cold certainty. "I'll say my comments in the right setting," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight that made Sullivan's grin falter for a split second. Carter chuckled, misreading his calm as arrogance. "Oh, you'll get your chance. You're under arrest for possession with intent to distribute." Sullivan moved in with the cuffs, her hands quick and rough as she snapped them around Marcus's wrists. He didn't resist, his gaze locked on the horizon as the cold metal bit into his skin. "You're making a big mistake," he said softly, the words laced with quiet intensity that made Sullivan pause mid-motion before brushing it off with a scoff. "Yeah, we'll see." Carter shot back, grabbing his arm to lead him toward the squad car. "Let's see how tough you are in front of a judge." The ride to the station was a tense, silent affair. The hum of the engine mingled with the occasional crackle of the police radio, the only sounds breaking the stillness. Marcus sat in the back seat, his cuffed hands resting behind him, his posture upright. Streetlights streaked past, their fluorescent glow casting fleeting patterns across his face. He replayed every moment in his head. The non-existent stop sign, the officer's smug confidence, the planted bag. This wasn't random corruption. It was deliberate, rehearsed, a script they'd run before. Carter glanced at him through the rearview mirror, her lips curling into a faint smirk. "You don't seem too worried," she said, her voice edged with mockery, fishing for a reaction. Marcus met her eyes in the mirror, unflinching. "Should I be?" he replied, his tone flat but piercing. Carter laughed, shaking her head. "You're either brave or stupid. I've seen plenty of tough guys like you. Doesn't last long in a cell." Marcus didn't bite. He knew her type, power-hungry, bending rules to fit their game, counting on the system to cover their tracks. For now, he let her think she had the upper hand. The station loomed ahead, a squat brick building with peeling paint and harsh fluorescent lights spilling out from the windows. Inside, the night shift buzzed with low energy, officers lounging at desks, sipping coffee, their voices a dull murmur. Carter and Sullivan marched Marcus through the bullpen, heads turning as they passed. "Got a big one tonight," Carter announced, her voice loud and brash. Sullivan tossed a bag of powder onto the counter with a dramatic thud. "Caught him red-handed," she added, grinning. "Looks like he's been running more than stop signs." Marcus stayed silent, his eyes sweeping the room. Every camera angle, every desk, every face. They led him to the fingerprinting station, where Carter uncuffed him and gestured to the ink pad. He complied without a word, his movements calm and deliberate, already plotting his next move. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The Arlington police station smelled of stale coffee and disinfectant, its fluorescent lights buzzing faintly overhead like a swarm of restless insects. Marcus sat in a cold, dimly lit holding cell, his back straight against a metal bench bolted to the wall. The bars cast long, jagged shadows across the concrete floor, and the air hung heavy with the weight of silence. His leather jacket still clung to his shoulders, the faint creak of it the only sound as he shifted slightly. Hours had passed since his arrest, but his mind never rested. Sharp focus, cataloging every detail of the night. Footsteps echoed down the corridor, heavy and purposeful. Michelle Sullivan appeared at the bars, clipboard in hand, her usual smirk plastered across her face. "Morning, sunshine," she said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "Sleep okay, or was the bench not 5-star enough for you?" Marcus met her gaze without a word, his silence a weapon that unnerved her more than he let on. She shifted her weight, tapping the clipboard with her pen. "You got a bail hearing this afternoon," she continued. "But between you and me, I wouldn't get your hopes up. Judges here don't take kindly to drug traffickers." Marcus tilted his head, his dark eyes steady. "Good to know," he replied softly, his voice cutting through a bravado like a blade. Sullivan frowned, her confidence flickering, then turned on her heel and strode away. Marcus leaned back against the wall, exhaling slowly. The cracks in their facade were starting to show. All he needed was time. At the front desk, Officer James Keller sat hunched over his computer, his youthful face tense with unease. Fresh out of the academy, he'd processed dozens of arrests in his short time on the force, but this one gnawed at him. Marcus Porter didn't fit the mold. No defiance, no panic, just an eerie calm that lingered in Keller's mind like a splinter. And that bag of drugs? Too convenient, sitting pretty in the trunk like it had been gift-wrapped. Keller's fingers hovered over his keyboard, doubt creeping in. He glanced at the surveillance feed on the monitor above. Marcus sat motionless in his cell, a statue carved from patience. Keller's gut churned. He'd seen Carter and Sullivan laughing in the break room earlier, their carefree swagger grating against his growing suspicion, against his better judgment. He pulled up Marcus's file. The basics were there, Virginia driver's license, local address. But the employment history was a blank slate, flagged only with independent consultant. Frowning, Keller minimized the window and stole a glance toward the break room. Something wasn't right. Back in his cell, Marcus made his move. His hands rested casually in his lap, but his sharp eyes locked onto the outdated camera outside the bars. It was an old model, likely neglected in a station too cheap for upgrades. He waited until the hallway cleared, then shifted on the bench, subtle and precise. Hidden in the hem of his jacket was a tiny tracker, a standard CIA tool, small enough to miss but powerful enough to change the game. With a faint press of his thumb, he activated it, the silent signal cutting through the air like a whisper. His team would pick it up soon. He didn't need to explain. They'd know. In the break room, Carter leaned back in a chair, coffee steaming in her hand. "She thinks she's untouchable," she said, laughing to Sullivan. "Did you see her face?" Not a flicker of panic. "Yeah, well, that'll change," Sullivan replied, smirking. "We've got the drugs, the report, no witnesses. Slam dunk." Neither noticed Keller lingering nearby, his face pale, eyes darting toward the cells. The rookie's unease was palpable, but he kept his mouth shut. Questioning senior officers here wasn't just discouraged. It was a risk. Far from Arlington, in a nondescript office, a phone buzzed on a desk. A calm voice answered. Signal received. Location confirmed. Deploying resources. Back in his cell, Marcus closed his eyes, a faint smile tugging at his lips, not of joy but of certainty. The officers had no idea what was coming. The storm was brewing, and he was its quiet center. The station hummed with morning routine. Phones ringing, officers shuffling papers, the clatter of coffee mugs against desks. Marcus sat in his cell, Still as stone, the faint light of dawn creeping through a narrow window high above. His dark eyes traced the shadows on the wall, his mind a chessboard where every move was calculated. The tracker's signal had been sent hours ago, and he trusted his team implicitly. They wouldn't rush in guns blazing. Timing was everything. For now, he played the part, the calm detainee, unremarkable, invisible until the moment demanded otherwise. At the front desk, Keller's unease had festered into quiet resolve. His eyes flicked to holding cell feet again. Marcus hadn't budged, his composure unshaken. It wasn't normal. Most people cracked under the weight of an arrest, but this guy? He looked like he was waiting for something. Keller pulled up the arrest report, scanning Carter and Sullivan's narrative. Stop for failure to yield. Nervous behavior. Consent to search granted. Controlled substances found. Too clean, too scripted. His training screamed at him. Something was off. He paced near the cells, stealing glances at Marcus. Finally, he stopped, gripping the bars. "Mr. Porter," he said, his voice low, hesitant. Marcus looked up, his gaze sharp and assessing. "Yes." Keller swallowed. "Did you really consent to the search?" Marcus studied him, reading the doubt in the rookie's eyes. "What do you think, Officer Keller?" he asked, his tone calm but pointed. Keller shifted, flustered. "I'm just doing my job," he stammered. "That's what they're counting on," Marcus replied, his words steady, piercing. Keller's face flushed and he retreated, but the seed was planted. Marcus could see it in the tension of his shoulders. Outside, a black sedan rolled to a stop in the station's lot. 3 figures stepped out. Agent Daniel Price, a tall man with graying hair and a stern jaw, flanked by 2 others in crisp suits. Their badges glinted faintly as they entered, the air shifting with their presence. Price approached the desk, his voice low but firm. "Federal investigation. We need access to your records and holding cells. Now." The desk sergeant, a gruff man with a buzz cut, hesitated, his hand hovering over his radio. "What's this about?" "FBI business," Price said, unflinching. The sergeant relented, leading them inside. Keller froze at his desk, heart pounding as he watched the exchange. Carter and Sullivan emerged from the break room, their laughter dying as they caught sight of the suits. Carter's eyes locked onto Keller for a moment, and he quickly looked away, guilt prickling his skin. Price and his team set up in an interrogation room, plugging into the station's network. The tech agent, a sharp-eyed woman, scrolled through files. "Plenty here," she said. "Inconsistent reports, repeated patterns, procedural gaps. This isn't sloppy, it's systemic. Pull it all," Price ordered, his jaw tight. Every record tied to Carter and Sullivan. In the break room, Carter paced, her coffee forgotten. "You think this is about him?" Sullivan asked, her voice hushed. "Of course it is," Carter snapped. "Why else would the Fed show up?" "There's nothing to know," Sullivan muttered, but her confidence wavered. Price emerged, a folder of printed reports in hand, and approached the bullpen. "Officers Brenda Carter and Michelle Sullivan," he said, his voice slicing through the room. "We need to talk." Carter forced a smirk, stepping forward. "What's this about?" "We got nothing to hide." "Good," Price said, unfazed. "Then you won't mind answering some questions." The agents escorted them to the interrogation room, the station falling silent. Another agent buzzed open Marcus's cell. "Mr. Porter," he said, respectful, "you're free to go." Marcus stood, smooth and deliberate, nodding as he stepped out. Passing Keller's desk, their eyes met. "Thank you," Marcus said quietly, the words heavy with meaning. Keller nodded, a small wave of relief washing over him. Outside the interrogation room, Ray's voices echoed Carter and Sullivan's lies unraveling. Marcus paused at the station's entrance, the storm he'd waited for finally breaking wide open. The interrogation room was a claustrophobic box of gray walls and flickering light. Carter and Sullivan sat across from Agent Price, their posture stiff, the air thick with tension. Price leaned forward, sliding a stack of photos across the scratched metal table. Security footage showing the officers holding the unmarked bag before Marcus's car was searched. "So," Price began, his voice calm but cutting. Want to start the arrest report or jump straight to the planted evidence? Sullivan flinched, her eyes darting to Carter. We don't know what you're talking about, Carter said, her tone defiant but fraying at the edges. Price raised an eyebrow, pulling out audio transcripts next. These recordings, courtesy of Porter's hidden device, say otherwise. You two discussing how easy it'd be to frame him? That ring a bell. Sullivan paled, gripping the table. You can't use that, it's entrapment. It's justice, Price corrected, his smirk cold. And it's just the start. We got dozens of your past cases under review. Same patterns, same lies. You're done. Carter's bravado crumbled, her shoulders sagging as Sullivan buried her face in her hands. Outside, Marcus stood at the station's entrance, the crisp morning air hitting his face like a cleansing wave. Carter and Sullivan were let out in cuffs, their heads bowed, their smug grins replaced by defeat. The bullpen buzzed with stunned whispers as officers watched their colleagues escorted past. Price approached Marcus, his expression neutral. We got everything we need. Your work's done here. Marcus nodded. Make sure it sticks. It will, Price said, a faint smile breaking through. Marcus stepped outside, the weight of weeks lifting from his shoulders, replaced by quiet satisfaction. Justice had been served, for now. In the days that followed, Arlington reeled from the fallout. Carter and Sullivan's arrest dominated headlines. Police corruption exposed. FBI takes down dirty cops, their faces looping on every news channel. Charges against Marcus were dropped, and their past cases reopened, freeing the wrongfully convicted. The station faced a brutal overhaul. Resignations piled up, and the chief's press conference promising reform did little to mend the shattered trust. Keller became an uneasy hero, praised by some, shunned by others. He'd testified to Price about station procedures, feeling Carter's glare burn into him. But for the first time, he held his head high, knowing he'd chosen right. A week later, he met Marcus at a quiet diner on the town's edge. The air smelled of grease and coffee, a stark contrast to the chaos they'd left behind. Keller fidgeted with his mug. Wasn't sure you'd show, he admitted. Marcus raised an eyebrow, a faint smile playing on his lips. You earned this talk. Not many would have done what you did. Keller looked down. I couldn't keep ignoring it. But does it even matter? The department's still a mess, more like them out there. It matters to the people they hurt. Marcus said firmly. And to you, don't sell that short. Keller's tension eased, a small smile breaking through. What about you? What's next? Marcus leaned back, unreadable. Next mission. Always another fight. Months later, Carter and Sullivan stood in court, pleading guilty to falsifying reports and abuse of power. Long prison sentences erased their careers, their reputations ash. The scandal-sparked community called for reform, a ripple of change spreading outward. Marcus, back in his sparse apartment, packed a bag for his next assignment. A dossier on the table outlined his new target, but his mind was already ahead. His phone buzzed. Price's voice crackled through. Ready for the next one? Always, Marcus said, a faint smile tugging at his lips as he stepped into the evening air, the door clicking shut behind him. The fight never ended. Not for him, not for those he protected, but for now, he savored the quiet victory. The truth had prevailed, and that was enough. The story closed with a reminder. Beneath the deepest lies, the light of justice always finds a way to shine. Marcus Porter stepped into the twilight, the cool Virginia air brushing his face as the door clicked shut behind him. The storm had passed. Carter and Sullivan faced justice, their web of lies unraveled, and Arlington began to heal. Yet Marcus knew this was just one battle in an endless war. His phone buzzed with the next mission, a new shadow to chase. For him, the fight never stopped, but each victory carved a crack in the darkness, letting light seep through. To you listening, this story isn't just about one man's triumph. It's a reminder. Corruption thrives in silence, but courage, even from the smallest voice, can shatter it. The truth doesn't bend. It breaks through. So stand up, speak out, and hold fast, because no matter how deep the lies, justice finds a way. Thanks for joining me Until the next tale.